guys, HDA here from the Unearthly Gang. Today starts our new and improved channel where we are going to be focusing on 3 types of videos. We're going to go for a beauty, Disney and fantasy. Fantasy is clearly and obviously me, HDA, the author. And today we're going to start with fairy facts. And this series is going to be based on fairies for this month, as there's 2 new shows, 2 out there that are based on fairies. We've got the Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, which me and my other half are loving, and that's based on little tiny kind of fairies. They're not fairies, but they're super cute, and we have our own little fairy down here, which is Daisy. And we also like the Carnival Row, which Cara Delevingne and Orlando Bloom are starring in. We've only watched 1 episode so far, but that's on our list to carry on watching once Age of Resistance finishes tonight. So don't give me any spoilers on what happens. So for the beginning of it, we're going to start with some facts on fairies. So here we go. The fairy facts come from Fairies, obviously. They give all the information that you want to know. It's fairy given, but no. Seriously, fairy number 1, it starts with the word fairy, which is an English derived from an old French word, which is fairy, I guess, or I don't know, fée, meaning a woman who is skilled in magic, or a person with new power or virtue of words, of stones, and of herbs. And to me, that essentially means a witch rather than a fairy. Like, here is my little fairy. Oh, Daisy, say hello. Yes, hello, I love you. Say hello. Little Daisy do. She's a little Daisy fairy. There is loads of different ways to spell fairy, and it depends on how you want to go about it, how you want to spell it, with an IE at the Y, not with anything, but just FEAE or anything like that. But there is a spelling which is FAY, and that kind of gets confused with a German spelling for fey, which is FEY, and that means fated to die. And to me, I think that means like maybe in an old time, maybe when there were stories in Europe where it all kind of started with fairies, that FEY kind of means maybe that fairies are an omen of death, or, you know, they're fated to die, and maybe a fairy kind of did it. I mean, that's my little twist on it. That's the way my brain works. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but who knows? Definitely, if you agree or you think that sounds quite interesting, comment below and let me know. I believe, from my own belief, that fairies, from the start, kind of where they derive from is kind of Celtic, and their belief in higher beings and gods and goddesses. Because fairies seem to be very much connected with spirits and elementals, which are very higher power and kind of have manipulation above the world and the world we live in and the kind of powers we live in. And, you know, they have a massive connection with nature, which fairies are always connected to, because how can you not put fairies and nature, well, magic and nature together? I mean, I think a lot of magic, even if it's magic that's technology magic in some things, that's still connected to nature in some way, which is the natural element of technology and electricity that can happen. Lightning, hello. In English history, the word fairy kind of became fixated on, and people loving it, was in the Victorian Edwardian era, with the introduction of fairy tales that we know today and love today. I mean, how can you not love fairy tales, and who hasn't grown up with, in any period in Britain or in America or maybe around the world, with fairy tales and the word fairy tales, which obviously connects to the words fairy and what fairies are. But with that, fairies kind of only really go back as far as folklore kind of started in the Middle Ages, where they maybe even wrote anything down and where it all kind of began, because it wasn't as far back as Greeks or anything like that, though there is probably some touches in there of people what they consider to be a fairy. But to me, and what I've looked into and what I consider, fairies were very much more Celtic, and the reason why it was made in more in kind of the British Isles, you know, you've got like Scotland and, well, part of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Wales, it all kind of derives from that area and that Celtic kind of heritage. So if that's where it kind of begun, no wonder we only know about it in myths and maybe in stories, and it probably started back even further, but from what people can gather nowadays, it kind of started in the Middle Ages. To me, fairies are always going to be a number 1, because my first book that I ever self-published is Flighty, and that one is about fairies and about a fairy's struggle and his own struggle and my version of fairies, which a video will be coming up on my kind of fairies from my little world. For all we know, fairies go back to as far as the time where before the first humans kind of appeared, especially in Europe area. So I mean, if anyone knows maybe a key moment in time where it happened or where it's meant to have started, definitely comment below. I'd love to know. maybe your fact finding is much better than mine is. So touching on that, which I already touched on, but fairy folklore, you know, has the basis of where it kind of started is more like British Isles, so definitely Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, well, most known, and I think most places know it. And Carnival Row, they're kind of touching it with their little way that they've done it with the accents of the fairy actors, is Ireland. And I think anything bases, you know, Ireland is probably the place where fairy lore and that kind of stuff comes from, with their heritage and the way they kind of maybe lived their lives back when and what they believed in. But I mean, who doesn't love fairies? So with no true beginning with fairy folklore and fairies, you know, it's all folklore based and back to the Celtic era, and how it was told back through art is mainly when it kind of came back into the world, I think, especially in the Victorian and Edwardian era. Like, they used it in a lot of artwork. If you look back and look at artwork, it's kind of all their touches, but it's very different to maybe how we view it now with the way Disney twists on it. And even the Celtics one's probably very different, because theirs are kind of humanoid people that have a higher power above humans but are humanoid in nature, hence why a lot of the depictions seem to be of women in flowy white dresses, and they always seem to in fact be women. And I think elementals touch on that. A lot of elementals, especially the lighter elementals, were very much power based by women power, and a lot of men even nowadays seem to can't get the fact that women can have power, and if they have intelligence or power, that meant that they were a witch, which touches back on the first fact, where the way that they were described is it seems to be more of a witch based at the original of it, whereas actually fairies are, to me, cute little, well, not cute little, they are small beings with magical powers that can fly and can touch people in very special ways. So people's belief in what fairies are and what their living reasoning is very different and varies a lot. I mean, there's even the debate of if a fairy is a pixie or if a pixie is a fairy. I mean, it can be, that battle is very big, and it's kind of as big as Avengers against Thanos, with especially between me and Tammy Jean. Tammy Jean believes that they are pixies, and I believe fairies are fairies and pixies are very different. And I will do another video on pixies alone, maybe, just touch on that. Comment below if you think that's a good idea, if you'd like to see one about pixies and their origins. But Tammy Jean does believe they're pixies, because in Disney's version, in Pixie Hollow lives all of the fairies, and fairies are very different in Pixie Hollow. It's very different because they're pixies. And to me, a pixie, from what I can gather, would be a small creature, but doesn't have the magical abilities that a fairy does, or they have them in a very different way. A fairy, to me, has magic and can fly and can zoom around the world and do all of its magical little mysteries, but fairies cannot. Tammy Jean, based on Disney, definitely disagrees, but Tammy will be doing a Disney version of these videos and explaining maybe where fairies came from for Disney, and also what Disney fairies mean to Disney, because fairies are very big in Disney. And I mean, if you love Disney, you know that for a fact. Like, every time the castle comes up on the thing, you see little Tinkerbell fly across the screen. So let's not lie, fairies are very important to Disney. So when you look at original depictions of fairies with them angelical white flowing clothes and their lovely long hair, and they're quite tall, to me they are depicted more of angels rather than fairies, and especially that, I think, touches on the Christianity side of when that probably came into the British Isles and Europe in general, or the world, and them kind of using fairy folklore to kind of mix with the angels, maybe to merge them, to get people to consider what they believe is true, with fairies maybe are angels, and then also using it in a good way rather than the twisting on probably where it was flipped on its head, and when women were a bit more clever with herbs and stones and knew kind of what they were doing with the earth. Men obviously don't like that. So fairies are also seen as an extension of the nature that we live in and the natural world, and to me that means that's probably why they connect with elementals very much, because in Disney's version there's fairies that have a connection with each element, and they can kind of have that element, and with elementals, that's literally what they are. They're spirits, and they are elemental connections with the world and the earth. A big view of people is fairies, and if you think of fairies, especially in the olden days where they would always wear green, they were touched with green, so if anything, any element they were more connected with was the earth. So even though they could maybe fly, the connection they have is more to the earth, and more like an insect, I guess, where they have that connection with the earth, but they can fly to their destination they need to. Because they're quite small, it takes them longer to get to places. You can see that clearly with Disney again, because Tinkerbell wears green, and their main fairy is Tinkerbell, and she is wearing bright green colours all the time. So they've obviously gone for the very classic look, and I think Peter Pan did in the original book. He went for the very classic version and what a fairy meant and what a fairy is to the world. So the strong attitudes of what a fairy is and what they make them up is they always seem to be very feisty, mischievous kind of tricksters, and they like to play tricks. I mean, even one of the oldest tales of fairies is that they actually used to come and take babies away, and in form of their place they would leave a changeling, which was probably a goblin or something quite dark. So when the changeling would rise and grow, they would wreak havoc around the world rather than having a happy little child. So I think a lot of people probably use the excuse that their child was a naughty child because they were a changeling, they weren't a child. A fairy had come and taken their child and ruined their lives and ruined them by giving them this changeling. Where in older folklore, goblins and fairies were all kind of bunched together and meant the same thing. So a fairy didn't actually mean that they were always a tiny little beautiful person that had beautiful powers. They were actually probably a goblin as well, or a goblin maybe wasn't even an ugly goblin. For all we know, maybe they're the wrong thing, and we've been believing fairies are beautiful when actually fairies could be the goblins. But the original stories are a lot darker, and I think you can see that even if you look back at obviously Grimm Tales. They're all very dark, the original, compared to all the nice Disney happiness that we see, because they tried to teach lessons and show the world what it really is. But with fairies, based on fairies, I think their magic, especially their magic, is very much based on light and happiness, and they only seem to do small things rather than bigger things. Whereas if you look into my world, it seems fairies are very subdued, and every magical story, I think, if fairies are in it, they're normally the underling, they're not normally the main powerful creature or normally the head of it. They are the ones that kind of just skate along, helping here and there, doing touches of little magic. Whereas in my book, which I will come to in my next video, shows you maybe where a fairy's magic could become more powerful than all of them together. So definitely wait and check that out, and let me know if you like this video. Definitely subscribe, definitely click the like button, and if you're loving fairies and you want to watch the rest of this series, definitely let me know below. Otherwise, with this, no point. I'm lying, I'm joking. So if you guys love fairies and love watching fairies, love reading fairies and love reading books, definitely go check out my books. They're on the link below. I'll put them down there. You know, first one's Flighty, second one's The Diver. They're a connected series, and we will definitely touch on mermaids in the series one time, and that will be the next book. But they're all connecting, and it will be a series that maybe is one to watch, maybe is one to read. So, bye guys. Fairies. Daisy, come in. Come here. Are you a fairy? You are, aren't you? You're a fairy. She's a fairy. Daisy's a fairy. Daisy can fly.